The kiss was supposed to buy her groceries for a week, nothing more. Kira Sutton stood at the edge of the winter festival, breath misting in the December air, fingers numb inside her threadbare gloves as she stared at the coin purse dangling from Mel's outstretched hand. $50. $50 she desperately needed, because her landlord had made it clear that excuses would not keep the heat on past Friday, and her job at the factory had cut her hours again. Around them, the festival sprawled in shabby grandeur, strings of colored lights sagging between lampposts, vendors hawking roasted chestnuts and mulled cider from carts that had seen better decades. This part of the city had seen better decades. The whole district, really, wedged between the river and the old industrial quarter, forgotten by everyone except the people too poor to leave. "Just a kiss," Mel said again, grinning with the cruelty peculiar to people who had never missed a meal. "At midnight, everyone will see, it'll be hilarious." Kira's gaze slid past her to the man in question. He stood alone near the fountain, tall and utterly still, dressed in black that made him a shadow among shadows. A silver mask covered the upper half of his face, ornate and cold, the kind of thing that belonged in a museum or a nightmare. No one approached him. The crowd gave him a wide berth, an empty circle of fear that moved with him whenever he shifted. She had seen him before, always at a distance, always alone. Quinlan Obsidian. The name was whispered, never spoken aloud if you were smart. He owned half the district, they said. He controlled things, dark things. People who crossed him disappeared, or worse. "You're insane," Kira whispered, but her eyes were on the money. "Scared?" Mel's voice dripped mockery. Kira was scared, terrified. But terror was familiar, and $50 was $50, and pride was a luxury she had pawned long ago along with her mother's wedding ring. She snatched the purse from Mel's hand before she could think better of it, shoved it deep into her coat pocket, and started walking before her courage could fail. The crowd seemed to sense her intent. Conversations faltered, heads turned. She felt their eyes on her back, felt the weight of their judgment and their fascination, the same way people watch someone walk toward a cliff edge. Her heart hammered so hard she thought her ribs might crack. Closer, closer. He did not move, did not acknowledge her approach, but she knew he had seen her. Something in the quality of his stillness changed, sharpened, like a blade drawn from a sheath in utter silence. She stopped 3 feet away. Up close, he was even more imposing, easily a head taller than her, broad-shouldered beneath that expensive coat. His skin was pale, not the pallor of someone who avoided the sun, but something deeper, marble white and flawless. White hair fell to his collar, stark against the black fabric. The mask hid his eyes, but she felt them on her nonetheless, cold and assessing. Her voice cracked. She tried again. "I need to kiss you." Silence. He said nothing. Did nothing. Just watched her from behind that silver mask. "It's a dare," she added, as if that explained anything, as if that made this less insane. "At midnight. I have to." Somewhere behind her, a clock tower began to chime. Midnight. The sound rolled over the festival, deep and resonant, marking the death of one day and the birth of another. 12 strokes. She had 12 strokes. Kira moved before she could think. She pushed up onto her toes, grabbed the lapels of his coat for balance, and pressed her mouth to his. The world stopped. His lips were cold, winter cold, frost cold, but soft in a way she had not expected. For one heartbeat he was utterly motionless, a statue beneath her touch. Then his hands came up, gloved fingers closing around her upper arms, not rough but firm, steadying her when she would have stumbled back. The crowd's gasps and nervous laughter faded to nothing. There was only the chime of the bells, the cold press of his mouth, the impossible gentleness of his grip. She had expected violence, cruelty, some immediate retribution for her audacity. Instead, there was only this strange, suspended moment, as if the world itself was holding its breath. The 12th chime faded into silence. Kira jerked back, gasping, her heart a wild thing in her chest. His hands released her at once, falling back to his sides with a control that was somehow more frightening than force would have been. She stared up at him, at that expressionless mask, and for just a second, less than a second, she thought she saw something flicker in the shadows where his eyes should be. Not anger. Something else. something that made her chest ache in a way that had nothing to do with fear. Then she turned and ran, pushing through the crowd, ignoring Mel's delighted cackling and the whispers that chased her like hounds. She ran until her lungs burned, until the festival lights were distant smears of color behind her, until she reached the crumbling steps of her apartment building and collapsed against the railing, shaking. It was only later, alone in her freezing studio apartment, counting and recounting the $50 by the light of a single bulb, that she let herself remember the way he had held her. Not like a monster, not like a threat, like something fragile he was afraid of breaking. She told herself it meant nothing. A fluke. A moment of courtesy from a dangerous man who could afford to be amused by a desperate girl's stunt. She told herself to forget it, to spend the money carefully, to be grateful she had escaped unscathed. But when she closed her eyes that night, she felt the cold press of his lips and the steadiness of his hands, and sleep was a long time coming. The next morning brought freezing rain and a notice taped to her door. Building inspection required, repairs to be completed within 30 days or the structure would be condemned. Kira stood in the hallway, staring at the official city letterhead, and felt the last bit of warmth drain from her body. Condemned meant eviction. Eviction meant homelessness. Homelessness in December meant she could not finish the thought. Her neighbors were already in a panic, clustering in the stairwells, voices rising in anger and despair. Mrs. Chen from 3B wept openly, her 2 children clinging to her legs. Old Marcus from the ground floor just shook his head over and over, like he could deny reality through sheer repetition. The building was falling apart. Everyone knew it, but none of them had anywhere else to go. This was the cheapest housing in the district, the last refuge for people the city had given up on. Kira went to work because there was nothing else to do. The factory floor was loud and cold, rows of sewing machines clattering in rhythms that drowned thought. She worked automatically, stitching seams in garments she could never afford to buy, and tried not to think about the notice or the winter or the impossible math of her bank account. Lunchtime came and went. She ate nothing because eating meant spending, and every dollar had to stretch until it screamed. On her break, she stood outside in the alley, letting the rain soak through her coat because the factory floor was too claustrophobic, and she needed air even if it was frozen. That was when she saw him. Quinlan Obsidian stood at the mouth of the alley, perfectly dry despite the downpour, an umbrella held in one gloved hand. He was dressed just as severely as before, black on black, his white hair almost glowing in the gray light. No mask today. She could see his face clearly for the first time, and it stole her breath. Sharp cheekbones, a strong jaw, and eyes. God, his eyes. They were silver, true silver, pale and luminous and utterly inhuman, beautiful and terrible in equal measure. "You're getting wet," he said. His voice was low, quiet, with an accent she could not place, something old world and refined. Kira just stared. Words had abandoned her. He crossed the distance between them in 3 long strides, extending the umbrella to cover her. The rain drummed against the fabric, suddenly loud in the small space they shared. Up close, she could see that his skin truly was that pale everywhere. Not makeup or a trick of light, but his natural state, smooth and colorless as marble. He smelled like winter crisp, clean, cold. "Why are you here?" she managed. "You kissed me," he said, as if that were an answer. Heat flooded her cheeks despite the cold. "It was a dare. I'm sorry. I didn't mean I wasn't trying to—" "I know." He tilted his head slightly, studying her with those unnerving eyes. "You needed money." Shame joined the heat in her face. Of course he had known. Everyone had known. That had been the point, the humiliation that made the dare worth paying for. "I should get back to work," she said, but she did not move. Could not move. He was standing too close, and some animal part of her brain was screaming danger, predator, run, even as another part, a stupider, louder part, was mesmerized. "Your building is being condemned," Quinlan said. It was not a question. Kira's stomach dropped. "How do you— I know everything that happens in this district?" He said it simply, a statement of fact, no arrogance in his tone. "The repairs will be expensive. Your landlord cannot afford them. You will be evicted within the month." "I know." Her voice came out small, defeated. "I know." Silence. The rain continued its steady assault. Somewhere a car horn blared, sharp and angry. There are other buildings, Quinlan said, better maintained. I own several. Hope flared, painful and bright, before reality crushed it. I can't afford better. I can barely afford where I am now. I did not ask what you could afford. He reached into his coat and withdrew a small card, black with silver lettering, an address. There's a vacancy. The rent is paid through the end of winter. After that, we will discuss terms. Kira stared at the card like it might bite her. Why would you do that? Because you kissed me, he said again, and this time there was something in his voice, something almost amused, almost warm. And because no one else has dared to touch me in a very long time. He pressed the card into her hand before she could refuse, his fingers cold even through her gloves. Then he stepped back, out from under the umbrella, and the rain did not touch him. It fell around him in a perfect circle, as if the water itself was afraid. The building manager expects you this evening, he said. Bring what you need. Leave the rest. I don't understand. But he was already walking away, dissolving into the gray afternoon like smoke. And Kira was left standing alone in the alley with a black card in her hand and 1,000 questions rioting in her head. She went to the address that evening because she was desperate, because the alternative was a condemned building and a winter that would kill her, because some reckless part of her wanted to see him again, even though she knew that he was dangerous. The building was in the old merchant quarter, stone and wrought iron, impossibly elegant compared to the crumbling tenement she was leaving. The manager, a severe woman in her 50s, asked no questions, just handed Kira a key and told her the apartment was on the 4th floor. It was beautiful. Hardwood floors, high ceilings, windows that actually sealed against the cold. The furniture was simple but well made, the kitchen stocked with basics, the bathroom outfitted with hot water that ran clear and strong. Kira stood in the center of the living room and turned in a slow circle, waiting for the catch, for the trap to spring. It did not. That night she slept in a real bed, under blankets that smelled like lavender, and did not wake once to the sound of rats in the walls. The days that followed took on a dreamlike quality. She went to work, came home to warmth and safety, and tried not to think too hard about the man who had given her both. But Quinlan was not someone who could be ignored. She saw him everywhere now, or rather she noticed him, realized he had always been there, a shadow at the edge of her awareness, standing across the street when she left for work, seated alone in the corner of the diner where she sometimes bought coffee, walking 3 paces behind her through the evening market, silent as a ghost. He never approached, never spoke, just watched, with those silver eyes that seemed to see through skin and bone to the desperate, confused thing huddled beneath. It should have terrified her. It did terrify her, but it also made her feel safe, protected, as if his presence was a shield between her and all the 1,000 small violences of poverty. 2 weeks after the kiss, her factory raised wages. Not just for her, for everyone. A sudden and unprecedented increase that had the floor manager stammering explanations about new investors and company restructuring. Kira said nothing, but she knew. Somehow, she knew. 3 weeks after, the heat in her building stopped cutting out at night. The pipes stopped rattling. Small repairs appeared overnight, done by no one anyone could name. A month after, she found an envelope slipped under her door. Inside was a voucher for the local clinic, prepaid comprehensive coverage through the end of the year. No name, no explanation. Kira sat on her apartment floor with the voucher in her shaking hands and cried, because kindness was harder to bear than cruelty, because she did not know how to reconcile the monster everyone feared with the man who kept leaving her gifts like a fairy tale creature bound by rules she did not understand. She decided to find him, to confront him, to demand answers. The problem was that Quinlan Obsidian did not seem to exist in any official capacity. He had no office, no listed address, no phone number she could find. People knew of him, spoke of him in whispers, but no one seemed to know where he actually lived. Kira asked carefully, cautiously, testing the waters. The responses were always the same: a sudden wariness, a change of subject, a suggestion that some questions were better left unasked. It was old Marcus, surprisingly, who finally helped her. He caught her on the stairs one evening, his weathered face serious. "You're asking about Obsidian," he said. "Not a question." Kira nodded, too tired to lie. Marcus sighed, a sound like wind through a graveyard. There's a place. Old estate on the north edge of the district, past the rail yards. Big stone thing. Been there forever. You want to find him? That's where you go. But girl, he gripped her arm, surprisingly strong. Think hard before you do. Men like that, they don't live in our world. They got their own rules, their own prices. You go knocking on that door, you better be sure you can pay what he asks. He hasn't asked for anything, Kira said quietly. Yet? Marcus released her. He hasn't asked yet. She went anyway. Of course she went. Fear and curiosity and something deeper, something that felt dangerously like longing, drove her through the frozen streets as the sun set and the district descended into its particular brand of shadow. The rail yards were deserted, acres of rusted track and abandoned cars, and beyond them rose the estate. It was not a house, it was a mansion, Gothic and sprawling, all dark stone and sharp angles, windows like watching eyes. A wall surrounded it, iron and old, the gates standing open as if in invitation, or challenge. Kira hesitated on the threshold, every instinct screaming at her to turn back. She walked forward instead. The grounds were immaculate despite the winter, paths cleared of snow, dead gardens trimmed with geometric precision. The front door was massive, carved wood reinforced with iron, and it opened before she could knock. Quinlan stood in the doorway, dressed as always in black, his white hair loose around his shoulders. He did not look surprised to see her. Kira Sutton, he said, and hearing her name in his voice did something strange to her pulse. Come in. The interior of the mansion was exactly what she had expected, and nothing like it. Cold, yes, but also beautiful marble floors, tapestries that looked centuries old, furniture that belonged in museums. Everything was pristine, perfect, and utterly lifeless. There were no photographs, no personal touches, nothing to suggest anyone actually lived here. It was a mausoleum dressed as a home. He led her to a sitting room where a fire burned in a fireplace large enough to stand in. The warmth was shocking after the cold outside. Quinlan gestured to a chair, and she sat because her legs were shaking. He remained standing, hands clasped behind his back, watching her with that unreadable expression. Why am I here? Kira asked. Why did you do all those things? The apartment, the job, the clinic, why? Because you needed them, he said simply. That's not an answer. It is the only answer I have. He moved to the fire, staring into the flames. The light played across his pale features, casting shadows that made him look even more otherworldly. You kissed me, Kira. Do you understand what that means? It was a dare. It was a choice. He turned back to her, and the intensity in his silver eyes made her breath catch. You were afraid. I could smell it on you. But you did it anyway, and you did it gently. As if I were something worth gentleness. No one has treated me that way in a very long time. I don't understand, she whispered. Everyone is terrified of you. They say you're dangerous, that you hurt people, that you... She could not finish. They are not wrong. His voice was quiet, but there was steel beneath it. I am dangerous. I have hurt people. I will hurt more before I am done, because that is what is required to keep this district from tearing itself apart. Kira shook her head, confused. What are you talking about? Quinlan was silent for a long moment, something like resignation settling over his features. Then he moved, faster than she could track, and suddenly he was crouching before her chair, eye level, close enough that she could see the inhuman perfection of his face, the complete absence of pores or blemishes, the faint glow that seemed to emanate from his skin. I'm going to tell you the truth, he said quietly, and then you will leave, and you will be wise enough never to seek me out again. Do you understand? She should have agreed, should have run. Instead, she said, Tell me. He smiled, and it was the saddest expression she had ever seen. Then he opened his mouth, and she saw the fangs. Kira stopped breathing. The world tilted, reality rearranging itself around this single impossible fact. Fangs, long and sharp and white as bone, extending from his canines, designed for a purpose she knew instinctively even as her mind screamed denial. Vampire, she breathed. Yes. He closed his mouth, the fangs disappearing, but the damage was done. I am Quinlan Obsidian, king of the Northern Territories, and I have held this district in an iron grip for the past 60 years, because the alternative is chaos and death. The words came at her too fast. King. 60 years. Vampire. She tried to stand, but her legs would not cooperate. Quinlan remained perfectly still, watching her with an expression that might have been concern on a human face. "This district sits on a border," he continued, his voice measured, careful, "between 3 vampire territories, each controlled by lords who would gladly slaughter every human here if it meant gaining an advantage over their rivals. I took control decades ago, declared the district neutral ground, and have spent every year since enforcing that neutrality with blood and fear. The humans fear me because I have made sure they do, because that fear keeps them safe. If I seem weak, if I seem kind, the other lords will see an opportunity. They will come, and they will turn this place into an abattoir." Kira's mind raced, trying to process, to understand. The factory wages, the repairs. "I protect what is mine," he said. "This district, these people, all of it is under my protection, whether they know it or not. But protection requires power, and power requires fear. So I am the monster in the shadows, the name parents use to frighten children into obedience, and in return, no one dies." "But you're not a monster," Kira said, and was shocked to hear herself say it, shocked to realize she meant it. You're kind. You helped me. You've been helping everyone. Kindness is a luxury I cannot afford to show openly." He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and brushed his cold fingers against her cheek. "But then you kissed me, this poor, brave girl, who looked at me and saw something worth touching gently, and I—" He stopped, something flickering in those silver eyes. "I have been alone a very long time, Kira, and you made me remember what it felt like to be seen as something other than a threat." Her heart was doing complicated things in her chest. Fear and fascination tangled so tightly she could not separate them. She should run. Every survival instinct she possessed was screaming at her to run. But when she looked at him, crouched before her like a supplicant despite being a king, she saw the loneliness he wore like a second skin, and something in her ached in recognition. "What do you want from me?" she whispered. "Nothing you are not willing to give." He stood, putting distance between them, and she felt the loss of his closeness like a physical thing. "Go home, Kira. Live your life. Forget the monster who kissed you back." "And if I don't want to forget?" The words hung in the air between them, reckless and true. Quinlan went very still, his expression unreadable. "Then you are a fool," he said softly, "and I am a worse one for hoping you might be." Kira stood on shaking legs, crossed the space between them, and took his hand. His skin was cold, hard, utterly inhuman. She held it anyway. "Show me," she said. "Show me your world. Help me understand." He looked down at their joined hands as if he had never seen such a thing before. When he raised his eyes to hers again, there was something raw and unguarded in them, something that made her feel like she was standing on the edge of a precipice. "This is not a fairy tale," he warned. "There is no happy ending here. I am a predator, Kira. I drink blood to survive. I have killed, will kill again. The world I inhabit is one of politics and violence and ancient grudges. If you step into it, you will be in danger every moment." "I'm already in danger," she said. "I've been in danger my whole life. Poverty, cold, hunger, those things kill just as surely as any vampire. At least with you I—" She paused, searching for words. "At least with you I feel like someone sees me." Something broke in his expression, some careful control cracking to reveal the loneliness beneath. He lifted her hand to his lips and pressed a kiss to her knuckles, cold and gentle and utterly chaste. "Then I will show you," he said, "but slowly, carefully, and the moment you wish to leave, you need only say so." She nodded, not trusting her voice. Over the weeks that followed, Quinlan kept his word. He showed her his world in pieces, carefully measured revelations that never overwhelmed. He explained the vampire hierarchy, the territories and the lords who ruled them, the intricate web of alliances and enmities that had persisted for centuries. He told her about the blood trade, the donors who sold their blood willingly for money and protection, the strict laws that governed feeding. He showed her the underground, the hidden society that existed beneath the human world, speakeasies and meeting halls and entire blocks that belonged to the night. It was terrifying. It was fascinating. It was real in a way that made her old life seem like a faded photograph. And through it all, Quinlan was patient. He answered her questions without condescension, protected her from dangers she did not even know to fear, and never once asked for more than she offered. He did not feed in front of her, did not display the predator beneath the civilized veneer, but she saw it nonetheless in the way other vampires stepped aside when he passed, in the deference they showed him, in the cold authority that hung around him like a cloak. She also saw the other side, the way he listened when she spoke, truly listened, as if her words mattered, the way he adjusted his pace so she could keep up, conscious of her human frailty. The small gifts that continued to appear, a warm coat, books she had mentioned wanting, a repaired heater in her apartment that worked without rattling. He was courting her, she realized, in his own strange way, offering protection and attention and a focused intensity that made her feel like the only person in his entire world. It was intoxicating, dangerous, probably stupid. She fell anyway. It happened gradually, then all at once. One moment she was fascinated by the mystery of him, the next she was lying awake at night thinking about the way he said her name, the careful distance he maintained, the hunger she sometimes glimpsed in his silver eyes before he shuttered it away. She wanted to close that distance, wanted to see what he would do if she pushed, if she demanded more than patience and careful revelations. The opportunity came on a cold night in late January. Quinlan had taken her to one of the underground clubs, a place where vampires and humans mingled in a careful dance of predator and prey, desire and danger. The music was dark and pulsing, the lighting low, and everywhere she looked she saw the casual intimacy of feeding vampires with their donors, the exchange that was somehow both violent and tender. Kira watched, transfixed and unsettled, and felt Quinlan's presence at her back like a wall of winter cold. "Does it frighten you?" he asked, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "Yes," she admitted, "but not the way you think." His hand settled on her waist, a light touch, easily escaped if she wanted. She leaned back into it instead, felt his sharp intake of breath. Kira. Her name was a warning. She turned in his arms, tilted her head back to meet those impossible silver eyes. The club pulsed around them, but she only saw him, the sharp beauty of his face, the want he was trying so hard to hide, the rigid control that kept him distant even now. "I want to understand," she said. "All of it, not just the politics and the history. I want to understand you. You do not know what you are asking. Then tell me." She reached up, laid her hand against his cheek, felt the cold perfection of his skin. "Tell me what I'm asking for." Quinlan closed his eyes, and for a moment he looked almost human, almost vulnerable. When he opened them again, the hunger was bare and blazing. "You are asking me to stop pretending I do not want you," he said, his voice rough. "You are asking me to admit that every moment in your presence is an exercise in control, that I think about you constantly, that I want things I have no right to want." Her heart hammered. What things? Everything. The word was almost a growl. "Your time, your trust, your safety in my hands, your warmth against my cold, your life tangled with mine until I cannot remember what it felt like to be alone." His hands tightened on her waist, still careful but possessive now, claiming, "I want to court you properly by your world standards and mine. I want to give you everything you need and things you have not thought to want. I want—" He stopped, jaw tight. "I want to keep you." The raw honesty of it stole her breath. She had expected hunger for her blood, the predatory desire she saw everywhere in this club. Instead, he was offering something far more dangerous. Devotion. "Then keep me," she whispered. He kissed her then, and it was nothing like the midnight dare. This was heat despite his cold skin, hunger barely leashed, a claiming that spoke of centuries of loneliness finding an end. His mouth moved over hers with a desperation that belied his careful control, and she opened for him, tasting winter and want and something darker she could not name. His fangs grazed her lower lip, sharp enough to sting but never breaking skin, a reminder and a promise. When he finally pulled back, they were both shaking. "This will not be easy," he said, his forehead pressed to hers. "I have enemies. The other lords will see you as a weakness, a weapon to use against me. You will be in danger. I don't care. I care." He cupped her face in both hands, his silver eyes blazing. "I will protect you. I swear it. Nothing will touch you while I exist." "And what if something touches you?" He smiled, and it was a predator's expression, all teeth and cold confidence. I am the vampire king of the Northern Territories, Kira Sutton. I have survived 4 centuries of plots and assassinations and wars. I am not easy to kill. Good. She kissed him again, softer this time, sealing the promise. Because I just found you. I'm not ready to lose you. They left the club hand in hand, stepping out into the winter night, and Kira felt the weight of eyes on them, vampires watching, assessing, understanding that something had shifted. Quinlan Obsidian had claimed someone. The feared king had shown a weakness. Let them look, she thought fiercely. Let them see. The backlash came swiftly. Within days, whispers began to circulate. The human girl who had caught the king's attention, the poor factory worker who had no business in the vampire world. Kira felt the weight of scrutiny everywhere she went, saw the speculation in human and vampire eyes alike. Some looked at her with pity, others with envy, still others with cold calculation. Quinlan's response was immediate and uncompromising. He made their relationship public in the most dramatic way possible, appearing at her factory at the end of her shift, dressed in his formal black with a coat of silver embroidery that marked him unmistakably as royalty, and escorting her home with a possessiveness that left no room for doubt. The message was clear. She was under his protection, and anyone who threatened her would answer to him. It should have made things better. Instead, it painted a target on her back. The first attempt came on a Tuesday. Kira was walking home from the market, arms full of groceries, when 3 vampires stepped out of an alley ahead of her. They were young by vampire standards, probably only a few decades turned, with the arrogance of those who thought themselves clever. She recognized the danger, immediately saw it in their predatory smiles, in the way they spread out to block the street. Kira Sutton, the tallest one said, his accent thick and old European. We have been wanting to meet you. She backed up, searching for an escape route, but 2 more vampires emerged behind her, trapped. Her heart kicked into overdrive, adrenaline flooding her system. Quinlan will kill you, she said, trying to keep her voice steady. Only if he finds out. The tall vampire grinned, fangs on full display. And you will not be in any condition to tell him. They moved fast, inhumanly fast, and Kira had 1 second to realize she was going to die before the street exploded into violence. Quinlan appeared from nowhere, a blur of white and black and cold fury. He moved through the attacking vampires like death itself, utterly silent, perfectly efficient. 1 vampire lost his head before he could scream. Another was thrown into a brick wall with such force that the bricks cracked. The tall one tried to run and made it 3 steps before Quinlan caught him by the throat, lifting him off his feet with 1 hand. Who sent you? Quinlan's voice was utterly calm, utterly terrifying. The vampire choked, clawing at Quinlan's hand. Lord Draven, he said she was fair game. Draven was mistaken. Quinlan's hand tightened, and something in the vampire's throat made a wet, crunching sound. You will return to your master and deliver a message. Kira Sutton is mine. Any who touch her will beg for death long before I grant it. Do you understand? A desperate nod. Quinlan released him, and the vampire collapsed to the ground, gasping. The others who could still move scrambled to their feet and fled, dragging their injured with them. In seconds, the street was empty except for Kira and Quinlan and the rapidly disintegrating corpse of the vampire who had lost his head. Quinlan turned to her, and the fury in his silver eyes made her step back involuntarily. Then she saw the fear beneath it, the raw terror that he had almost been too late, and she stopped retreating. Are you hurt? His voice shook with the effort of control. No, you got here in time. He crossed the distance between them in 2 strides and pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. His body was rigid with tension, trembling with adrenaline or fury or both. I should have anticipated this, he said against her hair. Draven has been testing boundaries for months. I should have known he would try to use you. You can't predict everything. I can. I must. He pulled back just enough to look at her, his hands framing her face. You are my weakness, Kira. Every enemy I have will see that and try to exploit it. I cannot lose you. I will not. Then teach me to protect myself, she said. I can't hide forever. If I'm going to be part of your world, I need to be able to survive in it. He looked like he wanted to argue, to lock her away somewhere safe and never let her out. But he was a king, and kings understood the realities of power. Finally, he nodded. "I will teach you," he said, "and I will make sure every vampire in the Northern Territories understands what happens to those who threaten what is mine." He kept both promises. Over the following weeks, Quinlan trained her in the basics of vampire combat, how to sense their approach, how to use their speed against them, where to strike to cause real damage. She would never be their equal in strength or speed, but she learned to be smart, to be ruthless, to survive long enough for help to arrive. He also gave her weapons, small blades made of silver that burned vampire flesh, and a phone that connected directly to him, always, and he made good on his threat to Draven. Kira did not see the confrontation, but she heard about it whispered stories of Quinlan appearing at Draven's estate with a dozen of his most powerful lieutenants, demanding restitution for the attack. What happened in that meeting remained secret, but afterward, word spread through the vampire community like wildfire. Kira Sutton was untouchable. The king had claimed her, and the king's wrath was not something anyone wanted to face. The attacks stopped. The whispers continued, but they changed in tone, less mockery, more curiosity. Who was this human girl who had captured the cold king's heart? What power did she possess? The answer, as far as Kira could tell, was none. She was still poor, still working at the factory, still struggling with the same mundane problems that had plagued her before. The difference was that now she had Quinlan, and he had her, and somehow that was enough to shift the balance of power in ways she did not fully understand. Their relationship deepened as winter gave way to early spring. Quinlan was an attentive partner in ways that constantly surprised her. He remembered everything she said, anticipated her needs before she voiced them, and treated her with a careful reverence that made her feel precious. But he was also a king, and she saw that side of him too, the cold authority, the brutal decisiveness, the way he could end a life without hesitation if it served his purposes. It should have frightened her. Sometimes it did. But she also understood that this was who he was, the duality that allowed him to rule effectively. He was gentle with her and merciless with his enemies, protective of his people and ruthless toward those who threatened them. He was exactly what this district needed, even if most of them would never know it. She met his inner circle, the vampires who served as his advisors and enforcers. They were ancient, powerful, and deeply loyal, though their initial reactions to her ranged from skepticism to outright hostility. She won them over slowly, not through any grand gesture, but simply by being herself honest, practical, unafraid to speak her mind. Quinlan's second, a terrifying female vampire named Seraphine, who had been turned during the French Revolution, eventually gave Kira a nod of approval. "You are good for him," Seraphine said one evening, her voice carrying the weight of centuries. "I have not seen him this alive in decades. Do not break his heart, little human. He has so few pieces left to break." The warning was clear, but Kira also heard the affection beneath it. These ancient creatures cared for their king, in their own way, and they were willing to accept her if it meant his happiness. Spring brought new challenges. The truce Quinlan had maintained for 60 years began to show cracks. Lord Draven, humiliated by Quinlan's response to the attack, started making moves, small territorial incursions, whispers of alliances with other lords, hints that perhaps the Northern Territories needed new leadership. Quinlan handled each challenge with cold efficiency, but Kira could see the strain it put on him, the weight of constant vigilance. "Why do you do this?" she asked one night, curled against his side on the sofa in his study. Outside, rain lashed the windows, but inside was warm and safe. "You could leave. Find somewhere peaceful. You're powerful enough to go anywhere, do anything. Why stay here and fight?" Quinlan was quiet for a long moment, his fingers tracing idle patterns on her arm. "Because if I leave, this district falls," he said finally. "The humans here are poor, powerless, forgotten by their own government. They are easy prey. If I abandon my post, Draven and the others will turn this place into a hunting ground within weeks. Thousands will die. So you're protecting them." "I am protecting what is mine," he corrected gently. "This district is my territory. These people are my responsibility. That has always been the vampire way. We take what we want, and we defend it absolutely. I claimed this place decades ago, and I will not surrender it to lesser predators, even though they fear you, especially because they fear me." He shifted. turning to look at her directly. Their fear keeps them safe, Kira. It keeps them inside after dark, keeps them from wandering into danger, keeps them from drawing the attention of worse things than me. I would rather be feared and have them live than be loved and have them die. She understood, though it made her heart ache. He had chosen this loneliness, this isolation, because it was the price of protection. He was a monster by reputation, so he could be a guardian in truth. "You're not alone anymore," she said softly, taking his hand. "You have me now." His expression softened, some of the hardness melting away. "Yes," he agreed, "I have you, my greatest treasure and my greatest vulnerability. I can be both. You are both." He kissed her forehead, cold lips lingering. "And I would not change it, even knowing the danger." The real crisis came in April. Kira was at the factory when Seraphine appeared, moving through the crowded floor with the kind of presence that made everyone instinctively move aside. She found Kira at her station and leaned in close. "You need to come with me," Seraphine said quietly. "Now." The ice in her tone killed any thought of argument. Kira followed her out to the alley where a sleek black car waited. They drove in silence through the city, heading toward the old estate, and with every passing minute, Kira's anxiety ratcheted higher. "What happened?" she finally asked. "Draven challenged Quinlan to formal combat," Seraphine said, her jaw tight. "Single combat, old laws. Quinlan accepted. The fight is tonight." Kira's blood turned to ice. "Can't he refuse?" "Not without losing face, and face is everything in vampire politics. If he refused, it would be seen as weakness, and the other lords would move against him immediately." Seraphine's hands tightened on the wheel. "He has no choice." "Will he win?" Seraphine's hesitation was answer enough. "Draven is old and powerful. Quinlan is older and more powerful, but he has not fought a formal duel in decades, and Draven is desperate, which makes him dangerous." They arrived at the estate to find it in controlled chaos. Vampires moved through the halls with purpose, preparing for the evening's event. Kira followed Seraphine to Quinlan's private chambers and found him dressing for battle-black leather and reinforced fabric, clothing designed to offer protection without sacrificing mobility. He turned when she entered, and something in his expression cracked when he saw her. "You should not be here," he said, but there was no force behind the words. "Where else would I be?" She crossed to him, ignoring Seraphine's discreet exit. "I'm not leaving you to face this alone." "Kira," he stopped, reaching for her, pulling her close. "If I lose, you won't. If I do," he continued, relentless, "Seraphine will get you out of the district. I have made arrangements, money, new identity, everything you need to disappear." "I don't want to disappear. I want you to win. I will do my best." He cupped her face, silver eyes searching hers. "But I need you to promise me that if the worst happens, you will run. You will not stay and try to avenge me or do anything foolish. You will live, Kira. Promise me." Tears burned her eyes. "I promise." He kissed her then, deep and desperate, like he was trying to memorize the taste of her. When he pulled back, his control was restored, the warrior king replacing the vulnerable man. "Stay in the estate," he commanded. "Watch if you must, but do not interfere, no matter what happens." She nodded, not trusting her voice. The duel took place in the underground, in an old warehouse that had been converted into a fighting arena. Kira watched from a balcony alongside Seraphine and the other members of Quinlan's inner circle, her heart in her throat. Below, vampires from across the territories gathered, their presence a reminder of how much rested on this fight. If Quinlan lost, the northern territories would fall to Draven, and the fragile peace would shatter. Quinlan entered from one side, dressed in black, his white hair bound back, his expression cold and remote. Draven entered from the other, a massive vampire with dark hair and cruel features, older than Quinlan by at least a century, if the stories were true. They met in the center of the arena, and the crowd fell silent. The rules were simple and ancient: no weapons, no interference. Fight until one yielded or died. They circled each other, and then the fight began. It was brutal. Faster than Kira's eyes could properly follow, the two vampires became blurs of motion, superhuman speed and strength on display. They crashed together with impacts that shook the floor, broke apart, came together again. Blood flew black in the dim light, alien and wrong. Quinlan was fast, precise, fighting with the economy of motion that spoke of centuries of experience. But Draven was powerful, each of his blows carrying the force to shatter stone. The fight raged on, minutes stretching into an eternity. Kira's nails dug into her palms as she watched, helpless, as Quinlan took hit after hit. He was winning, she thought hoped, but the cost was visible. His movements grew fractionally slower, his dodges less perfect. Then, Draven got through his guard, landing a devastating blow to Quinlan's ribs that sent him flying into the arena wall. The impact cracked the concrete. Quinlan slid to the ground, and for one terrible moment he did not move. The crowd erupted in shouts. Draven turned to them, arms raised in premature victory, and Quinlan rose. He stood slowly, something terrible and ancient burning in his silver eyes. When he moved, it was with a speed that made his earlier fighting look slow. He crossed the arena in a blur and hit Draven with such force that the larger vampire actually left the ground. They crashed down together, and Quinlan was on him, relentless, a cold fury unleashed. The fight ended quickly after that. Quinlan's hand closed around Draven's throat, his fangs at the other vampire's neck, poised to tear. The crowd went silent. "Yield!" Quinlan commanded, his voice carrying to every corner of the arena. Draven struggled for a moment, pride warring with survival. Then, finally, a choked gasp. "I yield!" Quinlan released him immediately, standing and stepping back. The fight was over. He had won. The crowd's roar was deafening. Kira sagged against the railing, relief making her light-headed. Seraphine gripped her shoulder, steadying her. "It is done," the ancient vampire said, satisfaction in her voice. "The territories remain his." They brought Quinlan back to the estate, and Kira was waiting. He looked terrible, blood-covered, visibly injured despite his supernatural healing, but he was alive and he had won. She went to him without hesitation, and he caught her against him, heedless of the blood. "You're hurt," she said, pulling back to assess the damage. "I will heal." His voice was rough with exhaustion. "It is over, Kira. Draven will not challenge me again, and the others will think twice before testing me." "Good." She took his hand, started leading him toward his chambers. "Come on, you need to rest." He followed docilely, which told her exactly how much the fight had taken out of him. She helped him clean up, washing away the blood with gentle hands, cataloging his injuries. Most were already healing, the cuts closing, the bruises fading. Vampire resilience was terrifying and wonderful in equal measure. When he was clean and bandaged where necessary, she guided him to the bed. He pulled her down with him, tucking her against his side with a possessiveness that made her smile. "I was afraid," she admitted quietly. "When he hit you and you went down, I thought, I know." His arms tightened around her. "I'm sorry you had to see that. But it is the reality of my world, Kira. There will always be challenges, always be those who think they can take what is mine. I will fight them all, as many times as necessary, because I will not surrender you or this district or anything else I have claimed. I don't want you to fight alone. I do not. I have you now." He pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "You are my strength, even when you are not in the arena. Knowing you are safe, knowing you are waiting for me, it makes me invincible." They lay together in silence, listening to the rain against the windows, and Kira felt something settle in her chest. This was her life now. This strange, dangerous, beautiful life with a vampire king who fought to protect the forgotten and came home to her bloodied but victorious. It was not what she had imagined for herself, but it was real and it was hers, and she would not trade it for anything. Spring turned to summer, and the district thrived under Quinlan's continued protection. The factory expanded, creating new jobs. Buildings were repaired, infrastructure improved. To the humans, it seemed like random good fortune, city investment finally reaching their forgotten corner. Kira knew better. She saw Quinlan's hand in every improvement, saw the careful way he channeled resources without drawing attention to himself. "You could take credit," she told him one evening as they walked through the night market together. He insisted on these walks, on her being seen at his side, a clear message of his protection. "Let them know you're helping." "And destroy the fear that keeps them safe?" He shook his head. "No. Let them think I am the monster. Let them fear the dark. It costs me nothing and saves their lives. But Kira noticed changes anyway, small things. People still avoided Quinlan, still whispered and made warning signs, but there was less genuine terror now and more performative caution. As if on some instinctive level, they understood that the monster in their midst was not truly their enemy. She mentioned it to old Marcus one day, and he gave her a shrewd look. "People ain't stupid," he said. "They notice when things get better. They notice when the bad things everyone says will happen never do. Give it time. Fear can't hold against evidence forever." He was right. By midsummer, the whispers had shifted, still wary, still cautious, but with an undercurrent of something new. Gratitude, maybe, or at least acceptance. And then came the night that changed everything. Kira was walking home from a late shift, Quinlan beside her as always, when they heard the scream. It came from an alley 2 streets over, high and terrified, cut short too quickly. They ran, Quinlan's speed carrying him ahead, and burst into the alley to find a nightmare in progress. 3 vampires had cornered a family mother, father, 2 small children. One vampire already had the father pinned against the wall, fangs at his throat. The others were advancing on the mother and children with the slow deliberation of predators who knew their prey had nowhere to run. Quinlan's roar shook the alley. The vampires froze, turning, and Kira saw the moment they recognized him, saw the fear flood their faces. "This is neutral territory," Quinlan said, his voice lethally quiet. "Feeding on unwilling humans is forbidden. You know the laws." "Lord Obsidian." The tallest vampire started, but Quinlan was already moving. He executed all 3 in under 30 seconds. It was brutal, efficient, and absolutely merciless. When it was done, the alley was silent except for the family's terrified breathing and the sound of vampire corpses crumbling to ash. Quinlan turned to the family, and Kira saw him realize the problem. They had seen everything. Seen the vampires, seen him kill them, seen the supernatural violence that was supposed to stay hidden. And more than that, they had heard him called by name. Lord Obsidian. The monster of the district. The thing that went bump in the night. The father pulled his family close, shielding them with his body, and stared at Quinlan with naked terror. "Please," he whispered, "please don't hurt them. Take me if you must, but let them go." Quinlan went very still. Kira could see the calculation in his eyes, the cold assessment of how to handle this. Witnesses were dangerous. In vampire politics, witnesses who could not be trusted meant loose ends, and loose ends were eliminated. She stepped forward before he could speak, placing herself between Quinlan and the family. "You're safe," she said firmly. "No one is going to hurt you." The mother recognized her. Kira saw it in her eyes. "You're from the factory. You're with him?" "Yes?" Kira glanced back at Quinlan, then returned her attention to the family. "Those vampires were breaking the law. Mr. Obsidian enforces the law. You're safe now." "The law," the father repeated, confusion cutting through the fear. "What law?" And there it was, the moment of choice. Quinlan could kill them, hide the truth, maintain the careful fiction. Or he could trust them. Trust that the district he had protected for 60 years might be ready to know the truth. Quinlan moved to stand beside Kira, and when he spoke, his voice was gentle in a way she had rarely heard. "The law that says this district is neutral ground, that no vampire may hunt here without permission, that humans under my protection are not prey." He paused. "I am Quinlan Obsidian. I am a vampire, and I am the lord of this territory. And I have spent the last 60 years making sure that what almost happened to you tonight never does happen. The monsters you fear, I hunt them, I kill them, I keep this district safe." The family stared at him, trying to process this impossible information. Kira held her breath, waiting. Finally, the mother spoke. "The factory wages, the building repairs, the clinic vouchers, that was you?" "Yes." "Why?" The father's voice shook. "Why would a vampire do that?" "Because you are mine to protect." Quinlan said it simply, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "This district, these people I claimed you all decades ago, and I keep what is mine safe. That is the vampire way." Silence. The children stared at Quinlan with wide eyes, more fascinated now than afraid. The mother and father exchanged a long look, some wordless communication passing between them. "You saved us," the mother said finally. "I enforced my law. Those vampires knew the consequences of breaking it." Still. She stepped forward, hesitant but determined, and held out her hand. "Thank you." Quinlan looked at her hand for a long moment, and Kira saw the shock in his expression, the disbelief. Then, very carefully, he took it and shook a human gesture, a peace offering, a bridge across the gap between species. "You are welcome," he said quietly. The family left, shepherded by Seraphine, who appeared from the shadows to escort them home safely. Kira and Quinlan stood alone in the alley, surrounded by settling ash. "That was a risk," Kira said. "Yes." Quinlan pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her. "But you were right to take it, and I trust your judgment. They might tell people. Let them. Perhaps it is time for the district to know the truth. Perhaps 60 years of fear is long enough." Over the following weeks, the truth spread through the district like wildfire. The family told their story, and others came forward with their own moments when they had been saved by a pale figure in the dark, times when danger had been mysteriously averted, the pattern of protection that had surrounded them for decades without acknowledgement. The fear did not disappear entirely, but it transformed. People still gave Quinlan space when he walked the streets, but now they also nodded in acknowledgement. Some even offered quiet thanks. It was not quite acceptance, not yet, but it was a beginning. And then, on a warm night in July, the district threw a festival. Not the shabby winter market where Kira had first kissed Quinlan, but a real celebration, music and lights and food, spilling through the streets in joyous chaos. It was ostensibly to celebrate the district's new prosperity, but Kira knew the truth. It was a thank you, unspoken but clear, to the monster who had kept them safe all these years. Quinlan refused to attend at first, uncomfortable with the attention, but Kira dragged him out of the estate anyway. They walked through the festival hand in hand, and Kira watched as people's reactions shifted from wariness to curiosity to something that might almost be welcome. Children stared at Quinlan's white hair and pale skin with fascination rather than terror. Adults stepped aside respectfully rather than in blind panic. They ended up in the same square where Kira had taken the dare all those months ago. The fountain still burbled, the lights still sagged between posts, but everything felt different now, lighter, hopeful. "Do you regret it?" Quinlan asked quietly. "That first kiss, everything that came after." Kira turned to him, this impossible man who had somehow become her entire world. "Not for a second. Even knowing what I am, what I have done? Especially knowing." She reached up, pulled him down to her level. "You're a good man, Quinlan Obsidian, a good king, and I love you." She had not meant to say it. The words simply fell out, honest and irrevocable. Quinlan went very still, his silver eyes wide with shock. "Say that again," he whispered. "I love you." It was easier the second time, natural and right. "I love you, and I choose this life, and I choose you, now and always." He kissed her there in the square, in front of half the district, and the gathering crowd erupted in cheers. When he pulled back, there were tears on his perfect pale face, actual tears, impossible and beautiful. "I have waited 400 years to hear those words," he said, his voice raw. "I love you, Kira Sutton. You are my heart, my home, the best thing I have ever known." Someone in the crowd started to clap, and then they all were, applause washing over them like a blessing. Kira laughed, dizzy with joy, and let Quinlan sweep her into his arms. "Marry me," he said suddenly, urgently. "Be my queen. Not just in vampire law, but in human law, too. Bind yourself to me for whatever time we have." "Yes." She did not hesitate. "Yes. Absolutely yes." They were married in August in a ceremony that blended human and vampire traditions in ways that probably broke 100 different rules. The district turned out in force, filling the old cathedral that Quinlan had quietly funded the restoration of. Seraphine stood as his witness, old Marcus as hers, and when Quinlan lifted her veil to kiss her, the applause shook the rafters. The reception was held in the streets, a massive party that lasted until dawn. Kira danced with her vampire king beneath the stars, surrounded by humans and vampires celebrating together, and thought that this impossible, beautiful, hard-won peace was worth every moment of fear and struggle. As the sky began to lighten, Quinlan swept her away to the estate. They made it as far as his chambers before he had her against the wall, kissing her with a hunger that had nothing to do with blood and everything to do with love. They came together with desperate tenderness, and afterward, lying tangled in his sheets, Kira broached the topic she had been avoiding. "I want to stay with you," she said quietly. "Not just for my human lifetime. Forever." Quinlan went very still. "You're asking about turning. I'm asking if it's possible. If you would want that." He rolled to face her, his expression serious. "Turning is not simple, Kira. It is painful, dangerous. Not everyone survives the transition, and it is permanent. There is no going back." "I know, but I've thought about it. Talked to Seraphine, read the histories you gave me. I understand the risks." She took his hand. "I also understand that I am human and you are not, and that means I am going to age while you stay exactly as you are. In 60 years I will be old and dying, and you will still be here, still young, still alone. I don't want that. I want forever with you. The process could kill you. Living without you will definitely kill me, eventually." She smiled at his stricken expression. "I'm not afraid, Quinlan. I trust you. I trust us, and I want this." He gathered her close, pressing his face into her hair. "I want it too," he admitted, "more than I should. I want to keep you forever, want to never face the night when you are gone. But Kira, if something went wrong, if I lost you because of my selfishness—" "You won't. I'm strong, and I have something to live for. That makes all the difference." They decided to wait until winter, until the year anniversary of their first kiss. It felt right, poetic even, to transform her on the same night she had first touched him with gentleness. The intervening months were spent in preparation, Quinlan teaching her everything about vampire existence, making sure she understood exactly what she was choosing, building up her strength and health to give her the best possible chance at survival. The district continued to thrive under their combined leadership. Kira became a bridge between the human and vampire worlds, translating needs and concerns, helping people understand the laws that protected them. She was not queen in title yet, that would come after her turning, but she was already queen in practice, and the district loved her for it. December arrived with the first snow, and with it came the night they had chosen. Quinlan prepared everything with meticulous care, turning his chambers into a safe space where Kira could undergo the transformation. Seraphine and the inner circle gathered, ready to assist if needed, though Quinlan made it clear that he would be the one to turn her. This was too important, too personal to delegate. As midnight approached, Kira found herself surprisingly calm. She sat on the edge of the massive bed, dressed in simple white, and watched Quinlan pace like a caged thing. "You can still change your mind," he said for the 100th time. "There is no shame in choosing mortality, in living your natural span. I would love you regardless." "I know, but I'm not changing my mind." She held out her hand. "Come here." He came, settling beside her, taking her hand in both of his. "It will hurt," he warned. "The venom burns as it rewrites your body. You will feel like you are dying, because in a sense you are. Your human life ending so your vampire life can begin." "How long?" 3 days, usually. 3 days of transformation, and then you wake changed. Will you stay with me? Every moment." He cupped her face, his silver eyes full of love and fear and determination. "I will not leave your side, I swear it." "Then I'm ready." He kissed her, soft and sweet and lingering, tasting her humanity one last time. Then he moved to her throat, and she felt the press of his fangs against her skin, a familiar sensation from their intimacy, but different now, purposeful. "I love you," she whispered. "I love you." And he bit down. The pain was immediate and immense, fire spreading from the wound through her veins with vicious speed. Kira gasped, her body arching, and Quinlan held her steady, one hand cradling her head, the other wrapped around her waist. He drank deeply, taking her blood, her life, her mortality into himself. Just when darkness began to creep into her vision, he pulled back and bit his own wrist, pressing it to her lips. "Drink," he commanded. "Drink and live." She drank, His blood was cold and strange and powerful, flooding her system, mixing with his venom, beginning the transformation. The world spun, tilted, went dark. For 3 days, Kira burned. She was aware, distantly, of Quinlan's presence, his hands stroking her hair, his voice murmuring reassurances, his body curled protectively around hers. But mostly there was just the fire, consuming everything she had been, forging her into something new. Her heart slowed, stopped, started again with a different rhythm. Her senses expanded, overwhelmed, recalibrated. Every cell screamed and was reborn. On the 3rd day at sunset, she opened her eyes. The world was different, sharper, clearer, full of details she had never been able to perceive. She could hear conversations in distant rooms, smell the approach of snow, feel the vibration of footsteps through the floor. And Quinlan, beside her on the bed, watching her with desperate hope, she could hear his still heart, sense the power that coiled in him, see him with a clarity that stole her breath. "Hello," she said, and her voice sounded different, richer, stronger. "Hello, my love." He touched her face with trembling fingers. "How do you feel?" "Like myself, but more." She sat up slowly, testing her new body, marveling at the strength in her limbs, the perfect balance. It worked. It worked. He pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly it would have hurt her human body. Now she was strong enough to hold him back just as fiercely. "You survived. You are here. You are mine forever." "Forever," she agreed, and kissed him with her new vampire strength. They emerged from the chambers a week later, after Kira had mastered the basics of her new existence, feeding, controlling her strength, managing her enhanced senses. The inner circle was waiting, and when Seraphine saw her, the ancient vampire smiled with genuine warmth. "Welcome, my queen," she said, and went to one knee. The others followed suit, and Kira felt the weight of their acceptance, their loyalty. She was not just Quinlan's wife now, she was their queen in truth, vampire royalty, immortal and powerful. Quinlan took her hand, raised it to his lips. "The Northern Territories recognize Kira Sutton as queen," he announced formally. "Any who would dispute this, speak now." Silence. Then, as one, his people bowed. The district celebrated when they announced Kira's transformation. There was some fear, some uncertainty, but mostly there was joy. Their advocate, their bridge between worlds, was now strong enough to stand beside their king for eternity. The fragile peace Quinlan had maintained for decades now had a new foundation, not just fear, but love. Not just power, but partnership. Winter turned to spring again, and Kira settled into her new life with surprising ease. She was still herself, still cared about the same things, still worked to improve the district. But now she had the power to make real changes, the strength to protect what she loved, and an eternity to see it through. One evening, a year after her turning, Quinlan took her back to the festival square. It was late, the streets empty, the fountain quiet. They stood in the same spot where she had first kissed him, where he had caught her with impossible gentleness, where everything had begun. "Do you remember?" he asked softly. "Every detail. I was so scared." "So was I." He pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her waist. "Scared you would see the monster everyone else saw. Scared I would frighten you away before I even knew your name. Instead, I saw you." She stood on tiptoe, unnecessary now, but the gesture was habit, and kissed him. "I saw the lonely king who was desperate for someone to see him as more than a threat, and I fell in love. Best decision I ever made, accepting that dare," he said, smiling against her lips. "Best $50 I ever earned," she countered, and he laughed, the sound bright and free and utterly joyful. They stayed there until dawn, two vampires in an empty square, holding each other close while the city slept. Around them, the district they protected dreamed peacefully, safe in the knowledge that their guardians watched over them. The monster in the dark had found his light, and together they had built something beautiful from fear and loneliness, and a single impulsive kiss at midnight. It was not the life Kira had imagined for herself all those months ago when she was poor and desperate and daring herself to touch the untouchable. But it was a good life, a full life. A life filled with purpose and love and endless tomorrows, And as Quinlan swept her into his arms and carried her home through the breaking dawn, Kira thought that maybe sometimes the fairy tales got it right. Sometimes the monster was really a prince. Sometimes the brave girl won her happy ending. Sometimes love was enough to change the world. They ruled the northern territories together for centuries after that. The vampire king and his mortal turned immortal queen, and the district flourished under their protection. The fear never quite disappeared. Respect for power rarely did, but it was tempered now with trust, with gratitude, with the understanding that the pale figures who walked the night streets were guardians, not threats. Other lords challenged them over the years. All failed. Quinlan was as merciless as ever in defense of his territory, but now he had Kira beside him, matching his strength with her own, proving that the power of two hearts bound together was greater than any lone predator could ever be. They never had children. Vampire reproduction was complicated and rare, but they became parents of a sort to the district itself, raising generation after generation into prosperity and safety. They attended weddings and funerals, celebrated births and mourned deaths, wove themselves into the fabric of the community until no one could remember a time when the Obsidians had not been watching over them. And every year, on the anniversary of that first kiss, they returned to the festival square. They stood in the same spot, remembered the scared girl and the lonely king, and kissed at midnight while the clock tower chimed. It was their tradition, their reminder, their promise that no matter how many years passed, no matter how much changed, they would always have this, the moment when a desperate dare became something beautiful, when a monster found redemption in gentleness, when two impossible people found each other in the darkness and chose love. Forever and always, until the stars themselves burned out and the world forgot what fear and loneliness had ever meant. That was their happy ending. Hard won, fiercely protected, absolutely real. And it was more than enough.